Okay, so we are looking at the first oracle of judgment, and this is against Babylon. And we had worked our way down to around verse 17, and the Medes are mentioned there as the instruments of God's judgment on Babylon. And so that um, led us to Daniel 2 and Daniel 7, where the four kingdoms, um, Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, and Rome, are their career of those four kingdoms as they intersect with the history of God's people is kind of outlined there. And the kingdom of God comes in that fourth kingdom, the Roman kingdom. And since we looked at chapter 2 and 7 of Daniel, I had also put in my notes that I wanted to look at chapter 8, verse 20. But since we're in chapter 8, we'll just look at chapter 8 and read through that, even though it doesn't say that the Medes are going to conquer Babylon. You already know that from reading chapters 2 and 7. Chapter 8 focuses in on two of the kingdoms of the four, the two middle kingdoms. So Medio Persia Media Persia and Greece. And in particular, chapter 8 focuses on one lesser king who gives the Jewish people quite a bit of trouble. Uh, and so this is basically the subject of the vision. So thought we would read through that, and so we can have in our head a working timeline. So this is chapter 8, Daniel, and it's it says in the first verse, in the third year of the reign of King Belshazzar, that's the last king of the Babylonian kingdom. In the third year of the reign of King Belshazzar, a vision appeared to me, Daniel, after that which appeared to me at the first. And I saw in the vision, and when I saw, I was in Susa, the capital, or the citadel, which is in the province of Elam. And I saw in the vision, and I was at the Ulai canal. I raised my eyes and saw, and behold, a ram standing on the bank of the canal. It had two horns, and both horns were high, but one was higher than the other, and the higher one came up last. I saw the ram charging westward and northward and southward. No beast could stand before him, and there was no one who could rescue from his power. He did as he pleased, and he became great. As I was considering, behold, a male goat came from the west across the face of the whole earth without touching the ground, and the goat had a conspicuous horn between his eyes. He came to the ram with the two horns which I had seen standing on the bank of the canal, and he ran at him in his powerful wrath. I saw him come close to the ram, and he was enraged against him and struck the ram and broke his two horns. And the ram had no power to stand before him, but he cast him down to the ground and trampled on him. And there was no one who could rescue the ram from his power. Then the goat became exceedingly great, but when he was strong, the great horn was broken, and instead of it there came up four conspicuous horns toward the four winds of heaven. Out of one of them came a little horn, which grew exceedingly great toward the south, toward the east, and toward the glorious land. It grew great even to the host of heaven, and some of the host and some of the stars it threw down to the ground and trampled on them. It became great, even as great as the prince of the host. And the regular burnt offering was taken away from him, and the place of his sanctuary was overthrown. And a host will be given over to it together with the regular burnt offering because of transgression, and it will throw truth to the ground, and it will act and prosper. Then I heard a holy one speaking, and another holy one said to the one who spoke, for how long is the vision concerning the regular burnt offering, the transgression that makes desolate, and the giving over of the sanctuary and the hosts to be trampled underfoot? And he said to me, for 2,300 evenings and mornings, then the sanctuary shall be restored to its rightful state. When I, Daniel, had seen the vision, I sought to understand it. And behold, there stood before me one having the appearance of a man, and I heard a man's voice between the banks of the Ulai, and it called, Gabriel, make this man understand the vision. So he came near where I stood, and when he came, I was frightened and fell on my face. But he said to me, understand, O son of man, that the vision is for the time of the end. And when he had spoken to me, I fell into a deep sleep with my face to the ground, but he touched me and made me stand up. He said, behold, I will make known to you what shall be the latter end of the indignation, for it refers to the appointed time of the end. As for the ram that you saw with the two horns, these are the kings of Media and Persia, and the goat is the king of Greece, and the great horn between his eyes is the first king. As for the horn that was broken, in place of which four others arose, four kingdoms shall arise from his nation, but not with his power. And at the latter end of their kingdom, when the transgressors have reached their limit, a king of boldface, one who understands riddles, shall arise. His power shall be great, but not by his own power. And he shall cause fearful destruction, and shall succeed in what he does, and destroy mighty men and the people, or the saints. By his cunning he shall make deceit prosper under his hand, and in his own mind he shall become great. Without warning he shall destroy many, and he shall even rise up against the prince of princes, and he shall be broken, but by no human hand. The vision of the evenings and the mornings has been told. The vision of the evenings and the mornings that has been told is true, but seal up the vision, for it refers to many days from now. And I, Daniel, was overcome and lay sick for some days. Then I rose and went about the king's business, but I was appalled by the vision and did not understand it. Okay. So I think we're in a better position to understand the vision than Daniel, because it's already past history, right? So what the vision is about is the Greek Empire. Oh, I'm sorry. First, it's about the Medo-Persian Empire, and then the Greek Empire, and then the breakup of that empire into four smaller parts. And then from one of those parts, another king will arise, and that king will give God's people quite a bit of trouble. In fact, he will try to stamp out Jewish worship and the Jewish faith completely. So this is an attempt at the annihilation of all of God's people, or at least the conversion of all of them from Judaism to the Greek way of life. And so it's comparable to the other genocide that was planned, in the days of Haman, right, with Esther. So the history on this, the timeline basically goes like this. In the third year of the reign of Belshazzar, in verse 1, that's 550. 550. You don't need to know these dates, but what you want to get an idea of is the length of time that's being talked about. The very last thing that's talked about in this vision is the death of the little horn, and that's in 164. So we've got close to 400 years of history here, all condensed really quickly, just the high points. So we have 550, the year of the vision. That the first thing in the vision is the ram with two horns. It has one, they're both the same size, and then the later horn grows up taller. That's later identified as the kings of Medio and Persia, the Medio-Persian Empire. And the Persian Empire becomes greater, and so the larger horn there signifies the Persian Empire as ruling over the kingdom of Media and Persia. Specifically, in 549, Cyrus the Great, who eventually would overcome Babylon and deliver the Jews, he begins his campaigns in that area, and that lasts for about 10 years, from 549 to 539. And Cyrus the Great of Persia, over the kings of Media and Persia, conquers all of that area, and the ascendancy of the kingdom of Persia. In 333, Alexander the Great becomes the first king of the Greek Empire, and he is known for his very swift conquering of the area. He is portrayed here as a goat that crosses the land without even touching the ground. He's so fast. And he's fast and brutal, and he basically annihilates the Medo-Persian Empire and becomes ruler of a that vast area there through his campaigns. But he dies in 323, and the Greek kingdom on his death is divided into four and given to his generals. And so they have various parts of the kingdom, like north, south, east, and west, that they're over. And that's spoken of here about, the big horn is broken off, the one single horn, but in its place, four other horns grow. So the four generals take over. And that happens in 323. The next thing mentioned in the vision is the little horn. And so that happens, that refers to Antiochus the fourth of the Syrian part of the Greek kingdom. So remember, it has in four parts at this point. This is the king, basically, of the Syrian part of that, and um, he sets his sights on basically destroying the Jewish people and converting everybody to the Greek way of life. So he's Antiochus the fourth. He's also called Antiochus Epiphanes, which means the revealing of the god, and the god that he thinks he's revealing is Zeus. Um, People behind his back called him not Antiochus Epiphanes, but Antiochus Epiphanes, which means madman, Antiochus the madman. Um, and so he wasn't really well liked, and he was very vicious. And the way he's described is he's not truthful, honest, or have any integrity. He practices deceit and cunning, and this is how he gets his power. In his program to eliminate the Jewish faith, I know all of you are probably familiar with this. He did several things. I'll just mention a couple. Uh, if a person was found to have been circumcised or to have circumcised somebody in their family, say a child on the eighth day, that's a capital offense. Both the person who had been circumcised and the person who performed the circumcision would be executed. If anybody was found with a bit of the scripture, they would be executed. All scriptures were gathered up and burned and destroyed. The temple itself was sacked and destroyed and converted into a worship place for Zeus. Um, Antiochus Epiphanes sacrificed at least one pig and probably many more on the altar in the temple as a way to provoke the Jews and to honor Zeus. And so, he was uh, very systematic in his persecution of the Jewish faith. And this gave rise to the Maccabean revolt, which is, um, I'm not going to go into all of that, but that basically, the Maccabean revolt is able to get back the Temple Mount and get back part of Jerusalem, or maybe all of Jerusalem, and the temple is rededicated in 165, and the vision mentions that as well, that the temple would be rededicated. And then in 164, Antiochus died of still pretty much unknown causes. There are four different accounts of his death historically, and they each give a different reason for his death. So, um, so it's really unknown, except that what we know from here is he dies without the help of a human hand. So natural causes, sickness, um, something falling on him. It could be any of those things. But so that's what this chapter is about. And it mentions the Medes and the Persians, which is why I wanted to go to it to kind of help you with the timeline. And why would God's people need to know this, do you think? Why would they need to know the contents of this vision? It's 550. Why do they need to know that, in the course of time, they've already been told they're in the first of the four kingdoms in Babylon, and there's going to be three more kingdoms and then the kingdom of God. And even though they're going to be restored to their land, uh, I think these visions that are given so that they would know it's all of the promises associated with God's kingdom are not going to be fulfilled when they go back to the land. It's still going to be hard, and there's still going to be, yes, the temple will be rebuilt because it's desecrated here in this vision, and then it's rededicated, so the temple gets rebuilt. But it isn't the fact that they're back in their land and they have their temple doesn't mean that all of the glorious promises of the restoration will come true, because Daniel, actually, in the next vision, chapter 9, asks, how long is our exile? It's almost over. It's been almost 70 years. Jeremiah prophesied 70 years exile, and it's almost over. But our people, we still don't love you, God. How long is our exile? And God says, not 70 years, but 70 times 7 years. Long time. Which means that the great and grand promises of restoration will not come true until the exile is actually over, and the end of the exile corresponds with the period of the coming of Christ. So, so they're told this, they're given this vision so that they would be prepared, not so they can have a timeline and have a calendar. This is so vague, even the 2,300 days, and that's just a little bit of it anyway. That could be, you know, between 6 and 7 years, or it could be 3 years. That's even contested. Like, how long is this? Is this? Um, but the vision itself spans 400 years and basically says you're going to be dominated by foreign powers and you will be nearly snuffed out. And so when you see it happening, don't lose hope because God has told you beforehand. That's what Jesus said, right? He said, when these things happen to you, he's talking to the disciples, when they put you in the cast you out of the synagogues and they throw you in jail, and some of you they'll kill. And I've told you beforehand, so take heart. He says, don't be afraid of this, and don't think that things are out of God's control. Know that he has everything in control, and even this is part of his plan. The significant question that's asked, how long will this last? The particular period of Antiochus. And then there's the enigmatic answer about 2,300 days or sacrifices, or could be half that amount because those sacrifices, evening and morning, was every day. Anyway, the point of the question was, and the angel is asking about how long will this most intense part of persecution last? The point is that it's ordained by God and it is limited. And this should be the takeaway for God's people. It's limited, it's intense, but it's limited and it's overseen by God. And after that, after it's over, it's over. And then we get on to the glorious kingdom of the Messiah. Go ahead, Mom.
And the Messiah said, in this world you will have tribulation, but be not dismayed. I have overcome the world.
Amen.
And that's what this vision shows.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. It's the parallels for us are obvious, I think. And that passage there, John 16:33, really important passage for having the right view of what's happening during this period before the final establishment, the consummation of all things. And so it's having this type of thing, having the John 16 discussion of Jesus with his disciples. You will be persecuted. I've told you in advance. It's a temporary thing. It's limited. God is even in control over all of that, and he is bringing about his good purposes, and you just trust him and look forward to the coming of the kingdom. When that type of paradigm is essential for our endurance. You cannot endure if you think there's no end to this. This will go on forever. How can you endure? But if you know that God has planned it and is in control of it, and it is limited, then you can look to the end and you can say, you can persevere. And so the vision ultimately is for the perseverance of God's people. That's why people, drawing calendars and timelines and saying, "Oh, this is," it totally wouldn't have been useful to God's people for somebody to sit down and go, in the time of Daniel and draw out a timeline. That's not the point. They wouldn't have been able to do it anyway because they don't have enough information, but they would have, if they're anything like people who live in our century, some of them, they would have tried to draw timelines. And it's like, well, how is that helpful? That's not helpful. That's not the point. The point is God has history in his hand. And that means God has you in his hand. And so trust him. Um, so that was that's Daniel 8. Any thoughts, any other thoughts about that? Daniel 8 is one of the easier parts of Daniel. As far as the visions go, um, there's pretty much no disagreement except about how long are these days. It's 2300 evening and morning sacrifices. What's this period of time? Everything else, all the commentators agree on. So it's a remarkable thing. It's like, hey, I found a passage in Daniel where commentators agree on over 20 verses. It's like, wow. Um, so, okay. So that was kind of additional stuff. Doesn't really have to do with the judgment of Babylon, except that it's talking about the period after the judgment of Babylon and before the Roman period, and kind of outlining just the high points. And as the Lord does in his word when he talks about future things and future kingdoms, especially in the Old Testament, when he's talking about things, he's talking about them as they relate with God's people. He's not giving an entire history, and he's not answering a lot of questions that we might have, but he is saying, here's how they intersect with the kingdom of God, and this is how you should think about it and respond to my work here. So, okay. So now we'll go back to the outline and look at a little bit more about the Medes, I think. And, oh no, actually about Babylon and its pride, the reason why it's being judged. So let's go to Isaiah 13, and we'll just read through that again. We're going to look at the reason why, or just highlight the reason why Babylon is being judged here. So Isaiah 13, the oracle concerning Babylon, which Isaiah the son of Amos saw on a bare hill, raise a signal, cry aloud to them, wave the hand for them to enter the gates of the nobles. I myself have commanded my consecrated ones, and have summoned my mighty men to execute my anger, my proudly exulting ones. The sound of a tumult is on the mountains, as of a great multitude. The sound of an uproar of kingdoms, of nations gathering together. The Lord of hosts is mustering a host for battle. They come from a distant land, from the end of the heavens, the Lord and the weapons of its indignation, to destroy the whole land. Wail, for the day of the Lord is near, as destruction from the Almighty it will come. Therefore all hands will be feeble, and every human heart will melt. They will be dismayed. Pangs and agony will seize them, and they will be in anguish like a woman in labor. They will look aghast at one another. Their faces will be aflame. Behold, the day of the Lord comes, cruel, with wrath and fierce anger, to make the land a desolation, and to destroy its sinners from it. For the stars of the heavens and their constellations will not give their light. The sun will be dark at its rising, and the moon will not shed its light. I will punish the world for its evil, and the wicked for their iniquity. I will put an end to the pomp of the arrogant, and lay low the pompous pride of the ruthless. I will make people more rare than fine gold, and mankind than the gold of Ophir. Therefore I will make the heavens tremble, and the earth will be shaken out of its place at the wrath of the Lord of hosts, in the day of his fierce anger. And like a hunted gazelle, or like sheep with none to gather them, each will turn to his own people, and each will flee to his own land. Whoever is found will be thrust through, and whoever is caught will fall by the sword. Their infants will be dashed in pieces before their eyes. Their houses will be plundered, and their wives ravished. Behold, I am stirring up the Medes against them, who have no regard for silver and do not delight in gold. Their bows will slaughter yet the young men. They will have no mercy on the fruit of the womb. Their eyes will not pity children. And Babylon, the glory of kingdoms, the splendor and pomp of the Chaldeans, will be like Sodom and Gomorrah when God overthrew them. It will never be inhabited or lived in for all generations. No Arab will pitch his tent there. No shepherds will make their flocks there. But wild animals will lie down there, and their houses will be full of howling creatures. There ostriches will dwell, and there wild goats will dance. Hyenas will cry in its towers, and jackals in the pleasant palaces. This time is close at hand, and its days will not be prolonged. So, we've read this 3 times, I think now. I think you understand most of what's happening here, probably maybe even all of it. But the reason for the judgment is mentioned in verse 11 and also verse 19. Verse 11, I will punish the world for its evil and the wicked for their iniquity. I will put an end to the pomp of the arrogant and lay low the pompous pride of the ruthless. So generally, evil and wickedness, specifically pride and the celebration of that pride, Pride Day and Pride Week. But no, the pride in your own achievements or capabilities and not humility before God. In verse 19, Babylon, the glory of kingdoms, the splendor and pomp of the Chaldeans will be like Sodom and Gomorrah when God overthrew them. So pomp again, the prideful display of their own uh, ingenuity, power. The Babylonians were really into power. And so the judgment here is the same. We've seen this really consistently in the book of Isaiah, that God alone is to be exalted, and that everyone who exalts themselves will be brought down. And this is the main reason given for judging Babylon, is the exaltation of itself. The king taking pride in himself. You can think of Nebuchadnezzar, right, in Daniel 4, I think it is. Look at this great kingdom that I built with my own hands, and all his boasting. And then remember what happens to him, right? He gets reduced to living outside and crawling around on all fours and eating grass for 7 times, for some period of time, and then he's restored. Why? Because he's exalted himself against God and said it was his own hand that did those things, didn't acknowledge the Lord. So that pride is common to all judgments, and it's also common to all people. So we need to really guard ourselves against that. In chapter 14, verse 11, it's during the taunt. The same thing is said. Your pomp is brought down to Sheol. The sound of your harps, maggots are laid as a bed beneath you, and worms are your covers. So your pomp, is brought down to Sheol. Kind of a interesting thing. It sounds like, he's almost parading into Sheol, which of course is not the case. In all his finery, decked out as the great powerful king. And it's like, this is so an unfitting, an incongruous image, right, of the powerful king walking into the grave. And he's like, I am the ruler of the everything I see. Yes, okay, good. Um, uh, so Isaiah 2:11, and 2:17, we've looked at these before. Key verses in Isaiah: the haughty looks of man shall be brought low, and the lofty pride of men shall be humbled, and the Lord alone will be exalted in that day. And then again in 17, the haughtiness of man shall be humbled, and the lofty pride of men brought low, and the Lord alone will be exalted in that day. So slight difference in the wording. Some things are changed positions, but it's the point is, as I said, only the Lord is worthy of being exalted, and the Lord will defend his own honor. So that's what's happening there in Babylon. Now, in 13:19, It's said that Babylon will be like Sodom and Gomorrah when God overthrew them. And if you remember that in chapter 1, 9 and 10, God's people in Isaiah actually also deserve to be destroyed like Sodom and Gomorrah, right? If the Lord of hosts had not left us a few survivors, we should have been like Sodom and become like Gomorrah. And then God addresses them and he says, "Hear the word of the Lord, you rulers of Sodom. Give ear to the teaching of our God, you people of Gomorrah." So God is agreeing with the assessment of the people, or maybe of Isaiah, when he says, if God hadn't been merciful to us and left a few survivors, we should have been wiped out completely like Sodom and Gomorrah. And then God addresses the leaders and the people as leaders and people of Sodom and Gomorrah. So you could say that they've committed the same crimes as the Babylonians, or at least their debt of sin is as great as the Babylonians, and their depravity is as bad as the Babylonians. And the thing that is highlighted by comparing those two things, by looking at Babylon will be destroyed like Sodom and Gomorrah. Judah is like Sodom and Gomorrah, but will not be destroyed like Sodom and Gomorrah. In fact, God will save a remnant. It highlights the mercy and graciousness of God. And, but how is that possible? Right? Doesn't God have to judge sin? Right? Nobody ever gets away with it. He doesn't just blink at it and look away. And, and so these people, their sin must be judged. If he's going to save a remnant, he must judge their sin. And he does that in Christ. He judges Christ. Their sin falls on Christ. And we are absolutely no different, right? I mean, don't we deserve what Sodom and Gomorrah got, what Babylon got? We're not any
Right.
different, not any different at all. And so the reason that we don't get it is not because our sin was less and God could somehow overlook it. He still must punish that sin. And so it's put on Christ. And that's
Mhm.
the heart of the biblical message, the heart of the gospel there. Um, so I just remembered I didn't say something about chapter Daniel 8 that I probably should have mentioned. It's mentioned in Daniel 8 a couple of times that the vision is for the time of the end. I just want to identify what that is in the context of Daniel 8. In the context of Daniel 8, the time of the end is when these things will end. This is a vision for the time of the end. And it's not about the second coming of Christ, and it's not about the end of human history. The specific end in mind there is the indignation that God will pour out. It says it's the time of his indignation. He's going to bring judgment on Antiochus and on the kingdoms that oppress his people, and this is telling about that. And the time of the end is that when that indignation has been poured out. So just wanted to be clear about that. That also is usually agreed upon by most commentators. Although I read one yesterday who thought it was extended to 70 A.D. in the fall of Jerusalem, but I'm not sure about that. Um,
So can you, I guess, contextualize that a little more so that doesn't mean like, okay, the end of the Roman Empire, when the Roman Empire fell apart, that was the end that Daniel was talking about?
yeah, so Daniel, like chapter 8, he doesn't mention the Roman Empire at all. So
No.
it's not the Roman Empire. I would say the simplest way to understand it is the period of time. He's talking about a very, he's talking about history going to this very intense period of time where the
Hmm.
Jews are persecuted. And it's the end of that persecution. The period of the end is the end of that, the telos, the completion of that persecution and the
Hmm.
cessation of it. And uh, so by saying that, he's also focusing Daniel's attention on getting through the persecution
Hmm.
to that time, right? So it's not about yeah, as we all know, there are lots of ends. There are a lot of
Hmm.
endings in the Bible, and a lot of prophecies about things ending or new beginnings, which implies an ending. And so this is about you will go through an intense persecution, but it will
Hmm.
end. And the focus is that you will end. It will end,
Yeah.
you know.
So I mean, I'm not looking for a date, but so then it sounds like it's more of uh like the Greek rule over the area being dissolved was sort of what's at least associated with the end that Daniel's talking about.
Yeah, closer to that. So, you know, the death of Antiochus was 164, I think I said,
Hmm.
and the Greek period over, I mean, there's dominance of the Greeks over Palestine until about 63. I think it's 63 when Pompey, yeah, Pompey, Pompey, one of the Roman generals, defeats the Greek leaders and takes Palestine back.
Hmm.
Takes Palestine back, wrestles it from them,
Hmm.
and so they're still under foreign dominance, and that's Daniel's already told them that they're going to be under foreign dominance until the Messiah comes, and but
Hmm.
it's so yeah, so it's the end of the serious troubles, I would
Hmm.
say. Not that there weren't other troubles. It wasn't the beginning of the kingdom of God or the beginning of
Hmm.
everything being great, but it was here's the worst thing that's going to happen,
Hmm.
and it'll be over. Um, so something like that. I should have pointed that out when we were reading through it because
Hmm.
contextually you can see that it's not talking about um, like the second coming or the fall of Jerusalem or anything like that. It's related to the contents of Daniel 8. Okay, so back to Daniel 13. Daniel 13, 20 and 20 through 22. This is given
You
lots
mean
of,
Isaiah, right?
oh, Isaiah, sorry. Yeah, there is no Daniel 13. Isaiah 13, 20 to 22. Thank you. Um, about Babylon. It will never be inhabited or lived in for all generations. No Arab will pitch his tent there. No shepherds will make their flocks lie down there. But wild animals will lie down there, and their houses will be full of howling creatures. Their ostriches will dwell, and their wild goats will dance. Hyenas will cry in its towers, and jackals in the pleasant palaces. Its time is close at hand, and its days will not be prolonged. All right, so it's the very last. Its time is close at hand, and its days will not be prolonged, which has given rise to all kinds of questions about what how should we understand this section and in fact the entire prophecy about Babylon, but in particular this one about it being desolate, right? It's a haunt now for animals. There are no people there. It's desolate, and it says its time is close at hand, and its days will not be prolonged. Well, ultimately, Babylon was did become desolate and uninhabited, and but that took a long time. It it so Assyria destroys Babylon in 669, but then Babylon recovers. And in 6 or in 586, Babylon takes over Judah. And but then Cyrus captures Babylon in 539, and that ends the exile. But in Daniel 5, we are told that Babylon is taken without the firing of a shot. There's no, to use a modern terminology, there's no bloodshed. Only the king dies. So Belshazzar is slain, Cyrus takes over, and all the Babylonian people are really happy that they're rid of Belshazzar. and um, and so that doesn't sound like the prophecy. Babylon itself is intact. The people are still there. Um, it's not razed to the ground and nobody living there and all that. Babylon continues for another 20 years after that, and Darius, um, one of the Median kings, desolates it in about 518. So it took a while. It took a while to do this. Didn't happen all at once, and it raises the question about what does close at hand mean, and days won't be prolonged, and all of that. And I won't confuse everybody with all the crazy things that interpreters have said about trying to figure out how, how should we do this? What does it mean soon? What does soon mean here? Right? Because Isaiah is writing it in the 700s, and it doesn't occur until 518-ish. And it doesn't really sound soon, right? So, and between those things, right, between the giving of the prophecy and the fulfilling of the prophecy, you have the rise of Babylon as a world power, the demise of Assyria, the destruction of Judah, and the taking of the Jews into the captivity of exile. Remember, none of this has happened yet, right? When Babylon gives the prophecy, or when Isaiah gives the prophecy, the Jews are still in the land. There's a temple there. Babylon is not the world power. Assyria is the world power. There's a lot of history that's going to happen, after that. And all of the things I just mentioned about Babylon rising as a world power and Assyria being conquered and Judah being taken captive and the temple being destroyed and the long exile, all of those things had already been prophesied by Isaiah. They're already in the book of Isaiah. And so the people, if they're paying attention, they know that. And so soon doesn't sound like soon, right? If you're looking at from the context of the date of the giving of the prophecy. But the prophecy itself presupposes that the Jews are in exile in Babylon, that they've already been conquered, that they're in Babylon. What I'm saying is Isaiah 13, a prophecy against the Babylonians who have oppressed you, presupposes that Babylon has oppressed them, presupposes that the temple's been destroyed, that they have been taken into exile, and that it was at the hands of Babylon that did it, just as had been prophesied. So they're in Babylon, and now, so now they're in Babylon, and now this prophecy, if you look at it from that point of view, from the point of view of this is actually relevant for the presupposed audience, and it's that audience that's being told it's soon to happen. Well, that audience in Babylon, toward the end of the exile, many of them would live to see this happen. They would certainly live to see Babylon overthrown by the Medes and they'd get out. And some of them would live another 20 years and see Babylon actually be destroyed. And so soon there has to do with the presupposed audience rather than the date of the prophecy being given. And I think that's something we should remember when we're looking at other time-oriented prophecies in the Bible. It's helpful to know who the intended audience is. So, does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So in 1322, it says that its days will not be prolonged. The Babylonian kingdom will not be prolonged. And what this means is it's similar to what Daniel 8 said, that, there's a limited time here. The time is limited. It's not going to go on forever. And in fact, it's not going to be prolonged, which means it's not going to, the Babylonian exile and the existence of the Babylonian kingdom as a power over God's people will not last one more day longer than necessary.
Mhm.
And that statement obviously presupposes that God's in charge of history and he's got a plan. Right? And so God says to his people, it's necessary for you to go through this Babylonian exile, but it won't be longer. It's necessary for you to face the atrocities of the Babylonian kingdom, but it won't go on longer than is necessary. It's not going to be prolonged. And I have a note here to see Habakkuk 2 for a similar example. So let's go look at that. Habakkuk 2. And the Lord answered me, verse 2, and the Lord answered me, write the vision, make it plain on tablets, so he may run who reads it. For still the vision awaits its appointed time. It hastens to the end. It will not lie. If it seems slow, wait for it. It will surely come. It will not delay. So you have the idea of it has the appearance of being delayed. It's slow. It's taken a really long time, but it's hastening to the end. And it surely will come, and it won't delay. And Habakkuk, the prophecy is given to a people who are going to be judged by the Babylonians. God's just told Habakkuk, I'm going to send the Babylonians and judge you. And Habakkuk has said, they're worse than us. What are you doing? And God says, well, he doesn't actually say, what are you doing? That would be blasphemous. But he says, they're worse than us. And I'm having a hard time, figuring, grasping what you're doing. I would like to know some more so that I can get over this cognitive dissonance type of thing. And God says, you'll be delivered. I will judge them. I will judge them. But even though it seems like a long time that you have to languish under the Babylonians, it's not going to last one more day longer than you need it. There's no delay. My word is going to be fulfilled. In fact, it's hastening. There's no obstacle that will stop it. If it seems long to you, just trust me. Just wait. So it's really interesting, right? Soon, no delay, rushing. Seems like it takes a long time. It's the thing about not being prolonged. It's the same type of idea. There's an indefinite appointed time. That's what the passage says. There's an appointed time, and it is coming, and there's nothing that will stop it from coming. But the fulfillment of all my promises to you will occur. And so if it seems like it's taking too long, if you're looking at your circumstances and going, how long do I have to endure? The answer is not forever. There is an appointed day when this will end. And during this time, right now, and that appointed day, you're to trust me and grow in grace and look forward to the end. Of course, look forward to that day, when that appointed day, but not despair. Somebody who doesn't know that there's an appointed day will despair. Right? So it's the same. It's exactly the same as Daniel 8. That's what's happening in the end of Isaiah 13. Won't delay, won't be prolonged. It's soon. It's the encouragement to look beyond your present circumstance to the fulfillment of God's promises. So It turns out to be a really important concept. It's actually addressed in many of the Old Testament books as well as in the New Testament. And even though we're in a different situation from the Jews in exile, we are in actually, according to the biblical presentation, we are also in exile. Like, you ever wonder why, when you read the book of Hebrews, that the church is talked about as the wilderness generation? I don't know if you ever noticed that. It's pretty clear. There, every time a comparison with the Old Testament is brought up as far as an Old Testament people, it's always the wilderness generation. It's those people. And so who are the wilderness generation? Well, they're like the ones wandering around without a land, right?
Mhm.
That's to be in exile. To wander around without a land is to be in exile. And God had said to them, when you get to the land, my promises will come true. And so look forward to that, even though you're here in the wilderness and it's not easy and it's difficult, and there's lots of distractions, and you wonder, how long are we going to wander around this mountain? Haven't I seen this mountain 18 times already? Just you have to trust God and look forward in faith to the fulfillment of his promises. That's the position we're in too. And God's people are in that position often in the Old Testament. And it's, as Paul said in 1 Corinthians 15, all of those things are written as examples for us. So, Mom.
The other thing to remember, I think, about the wilderness generation is that, yes, they were wandering around and they were in a land that didn't belong to them, et cetera, but they had already been saved by the blood.
Yep. Yeah, exactly right. Another parallel. In fact, they'd been saved and they'd been baptized, right? That's what Peter says. They went through the water and they were baptized, and they never got wet. I wonder, people who argue about immersion or sprinkling, they never go to the passage in Peter where Peter says, oh, they were all baptized in the water. Or maybe it's Paul who says in 1 Corinthians, they were all baptized in the water and the cloud. It's Paul, 1 Corinthians 10. They didn't get wet,
Yeah.
right?
I'm
Peter
not
talks
sure if
about,
it's crossing the Jordan where it even says that their feet were touching like dry ground.
yeah, no, I think it's the Red Sea that it's talking about there. And then the second generation, of course, the Jordan would be comparable to that. In 2 Peter 3 or 1 Peter 3, Peter talks about the flood being an example of baptism. He says that Noah and his family, 8 souls, came through the water safely. And this is a picture of baptism, he says. Came through the water safely. They didn't get wet. So, it's the point about, they can't, water is a symbol, or water is a symbol of death. They go down into the water. That's baptism. Down into the water. You die to sin, die with Christ, down into the water. You're raised up out of the water, or you come up out of the water, and you are raised to new life, right? So they go down into the water, leaving Egypt into the Red Sea. They come up on the other side, and they have been baptized. They're God's people. They went from death to life, right? From death, the kingdom of Egypt. They go from death, they come to life. They're now God's people. It's a baptism image that is picked up by Paul. And the other thing too, I guess I will mention this. You read a lot of the Psalms, and the psalmist says, the waters are covering me. I went down into the waters. And when Jonah says that, he means it literally. I was covered with waters, but the psalmist might not mean it literally. He might mean it like, I'm dying here. But then God, you pulled me up out of the waters. And sometimes what Jonah does, and some psalms do this too. Jonah in Jonah 2 says, I went down in the waters. I was buried in Sheol. You brought me up from the grave. You took me out of the waters. I mean, he makes it explicit. And that's what the psalmists are doing too. So those are resurrection pictures, right? Those are new life. You go down into death, come up into new life. So not much to do with Isaiah, but helpful in reading the Bible. So I'm going to stop on the Isaiah outline right now. I see it's 10:29, and I think we're going to read next week about why the exile was as long as it was, which really isn't that long. But we'll read about that. Does anybody have anything you want to share or ask about before we end up today?
Well, I heard that concerning the fall of Babylon that it happened 200 years after it's prophesied. Is that correct?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was wondering if I've heard a lot of things from a lot of preachers, and that's one of the things came through my mind when we were studying it.
Yeah. Yeah. So Isaiah, I don't know the exact date of the particular prophecy of Isaiah 13, but I know Isaiah's ministry was between 740 and some people go to 680, but at least 740 to 700. And then the fall of Babylon is really the desolation of Babylon is in 518. So it's roughly 200 years. Yeah. Somewhere in there.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I'm going to turn off the recording.